Chapter 43, Spirit Awakening. Lin Feng had fallen into a dream-like state. In this dream state his soul had drifted from his body. His soul was floating through the endless darkness, it seemed like a world made only of darkness. In this dark world, there was no sign of life. Lin Feng didn't know how long his soul had been trapped inside the darkness. There was only a single light within the darkness, it was a small radiant light which had fascinated him. What an amazing light! The more Lin Feng approached that light, the brighter and the more gorgeous it became. He found out that the light was stretching through the infinite darkness and it was impossible to reach. The light had formed a spiral above his head and became a very familiar shape, it shaped itself as a book. It seemed like the chi of the entire universe was within this book and had been there since the creation of the universe. This book had seemed to contain all of the information of the entire universe since the beginning of time itself. Lin Feng stared at the book as if it was a precious gift which had been given to him by the universe, his eyes were radiating a fascinated light. When Lin Feng opened the book and looked inside, he found endless words streaming through the pages. The stream of words began to flow off the page and into Lin Feng's body, it seemed like all of the information recorded within the book was being absorbed into Lin Feng's body. Boom! A sound rang through the air, it had sounded like Lin Feng's body had exploded from the amount of information being absorbed through his skin. Lin Feng couldn't help but powerlessly sit down on the ground. He had returned from the world of darkness and was sat down on the floor. The night was still dark, and the rain was heavily pouring from the sky, it had seemed like almost no time had passed while he was inside that darkness. How could he find that magnificent book which contained such information? How could he return the sacred and magnificent light within the darkness? Lin Feng was breathing heavily. His body was shaking from the pain, his body had long passed the limit for how much pain he could endure. However, he was still alive and thanks to that pain, he had seen a world of darkness which seemed to contain the secrets of the universe. When Lin Feng had been suffering from torture a moment before, he had really thought he was going to die from the pain of having his soul shredded. The pain was beyond any he had ever felt in this world. How could a human being endure such a pain? The pain had been so severe that he had actually collapsed and almost died. Do other people have to go through such a pain and agony when they try to awaken their spirit? Lin Feng was looking at the deep into the darkness of the night. He did not understand how so many people had awakened their spirit through so much pain, he had actually believed for a moment that he had died. Even though Lin Feng didn't think that he was gifted or talented, he did have some confidence in his own willpower. He could not help but think how people with less willpower than himself could even endure half the pain which had struck his body. When his spirit was attempting to awaken, he was filled with 3 phases of endless pain which invaded his body and shredded his soul. Each time he was stuck by the pain, it was more intense and terrifying than before. During the final phase, the pain was so terrifying that his body had actually collapsed, while his mind could endure, his body had collapsed from the pain. Thanks to his determination and infinite willpower, he had been able to endure the pain for much longer than his body should have been able. That is why he hadn't immediately collapsed and instead he had started to bleed from his ears, eyes, nose and mouth. Maybe, the moment when the spirit awakens is a different experience for every person. Maybe it was only like this for me because of my spirit. While saying his thoughts out loud, Lin Feng's heart started pounding and he released his spirit. Lin Feng suddenly had an indescribable sensation. His surroundings seemed to have completely changed. Lin Feng wasn't in the same place any longer, instead he had returned to the world of darkness. This time however he could feel his surroundings and was much more aware of everything around him. He had the faint sense that he could see and hear everything around him, even though it was all in darkness. He could sense the grass as it swayed from the wind that was blowing. He could sense every raindrop as it fell heavily onto the ground. He had become extremely calm and he began to sense everything around him. He continued to move around and sense the changes. He did not know how much he had changed or how powerful his senses were at this point, but it seemed that at this moment he had become omniscient. He could sense everything in the world around his, it was all part of him. What was even more shocking to Lin Feng was that he was able to see everything, however the eyes he was using did not look like his own eyes. They were terrifying eyes which did not look human. He could not help but tremble when looking into the eyes, what a scary feeling they gave. Dark, spirit. Lin Feng realized his brain was much faster than before and he could comprehend things more clearly than before. The power of his spirit was almost scary to him. It seemed like his power was as infinite as the darkness around him. His heart started pounding again. A colossal shadow had emerged from his back. The shadow itself was shaped as a spiral. On the top of the shadow, there was a magnificent and sacred-looking book in suspension. The book began to open. Is this a spirit? Lin Feng had a questioning look in his eyes. It seemed like that shadow was able to influence Lin Feng's spirit which he had released into the darkness. Everything seemed to be so clear. The scene looked just like in his dream, an endless darkness, and within that darkness was a bright light. The book had appeared and was floating quietly above his head. In Lin Feng's memories, a spirit which could be released twice didn't exist. It was as if that spirit had 2 layers which could be released. The first layer was a shadow which merged with the world itself and created the world of darkness. The second layer was a celestial book. Lin Feng had thought that his spirit had initially failed to fully awaken. But not only did it seem that it hadn't failed, but that it also had gone beyond common knowledge. Celestial book, a book spirit? Lin Feng didn't know what kind of spirit he had at that moment. You are listening to Peerless Martial God audio on light novel Aloud. In the continent of the 9 clouds, there was an infinite amount of skills and spirits. The awakening of a spirit also constituted a considerable change. There weren't many people who could fully understand the mysteries of spirits. They only knew that there were a lot of different spirits which would all be different once awakened, depending on the person who had awakened the spirit. The book spirit was a mysterious and mystical one. Lin Feng was in awe. Its strength didn't reside in releasing attacks or protecting him during a fight. It was inefficient in both offense and defense, but those who possessed a book spirit could write down unusual things within the book. These unusual and extraordinary things could greatly influence the cultivation speed of those who possessed such a spirit. Oh my god, Lin Feng sighed. Suddenly, within the dark pupils shone 2 radiant silver lights. It looked like the sun was shining within these dark eyes. It happened for a short moment and then the silver lights disappeared. Lin Feng was thinking deeply. These small lights meant that the first page of the book had been opened. It seemed like he had been granted magical powers by the universe. I will call you my celestial spirit, Lin Feng whispered. His spirit gradually dissipated, and Lin Feng's eyes became normal again. His eyes returned to normal, and the terrifying darkness had left. He could see clearly and normally. He only had a strange sensation remaining on his back. He turned his head. A white-colored qi was still flowing from his body endlessly. Lin Feng could use the qi heaven and earth as he wished. He could create a shocking power with this qi. Lin Feng had broken through to the Ling qi layer. After the awakening of his dark spirit, which was the first layer, he was able to release the second layer of his celestial spirit. Even though his small snake spirit hadn't been able to awaken, Lin Feng was still extremely satisfied. Releasing the first layer of his celestial spirit would be enough to greatly increase his strength. The second layer, his book spirit, would provide him with support which would benefit him on his path of cultivation, and it did not require being released for him to gain the benefits. First Ling qi layer. From now on, I am unstoppable, thought Lin Feng confidently while smiling. He could feel how terrifying the changes were within his dark spirit. The first layer of his celestial spirit was his dark spirit, but its power was terrifying. From that moment, if Lin Feng met Lin Qian, he would have no problem defeating her. Even if Lin Qian was extremely arrogant, she still had an ice and fire universal spirit, but it was nothing when compared with his dark spirit. It was still raining, but the sun had started to rise on the horizon. Some rays of sunlight had started passing through the atmosphere. Lin Feng stood up and looked at his clothes which were soaked from the rain. He couldn't help but smile. Sitting outside all night had been an insane experience. Lin Feng raised his head and gazed into the distance, and he thought about what had happened during the night when he had ruthlessly slaughtered dozens of cultivators back in the city. If he had been a little bit weaker, he would have died in a tragic death. Nalan clan of Yangzhou City, Nalan Feng, you will sooner rather than later regret what you did last night. Lin Feng stood up and started walking. End of chapter 43. Hope you guys enjoy the chapter. Please consider subscribing and hit that bell button for future updates.